Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Dr. Lucy Ingram, and I am a faculty member in the Arnold School of Public Health at the University of South Carolina. I am also the co-lead of the research education component of the Carolina Center on Alzheimer's Disease and Minority Research, also known as CADMR. On behalf of our CADMR team, I would like to welcome you to our seminar series on health disparities in minority aging research. Again, thank you for joining. A few housekeeping items. Number one, we do ask that you please keep yourself muted during the presentation. And two, if you have any questions during the presentation, please put them in the chat and we'll be able to monitor the chat feature and share your questions with our speaker. So our speaker for today is Dr. Swann Adams. Dr. Adams is a professor in the Arnold School of Public Health with a dual appointment in the College of Nursing. She has been conducting research in South Carolina for over 20 years and predominantly focuses on understanding the determinants of cancer health disparities experienced by African Americans and ways to intervene to improve these inequalities. She has received grant funding from multiple sources, including the National Cancer Institute, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the South Carolina Cancer Alliance, and the South Carolina Cancer Center, among others. Today, Dr. Adams will be speaking about helpful tips and solutions to common pitfalls to enhance the competitiveness of all of our grant applications. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Adams.
Hello, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here, and I've seen some of you that I've seen on our list of members attending probably have even more experience than I do. I saw Dr. Blair, he's been around the show a few times, and others as well. So I want this to be, I know it's virtual, so it can't be really that interactive, but I love to get questions while I'm talking because they can help to target and really we can go in directions that are really rich. So feel free to put those questions in the chat, and then we're monitoring that and someone will give me a shout out and tell me, yeah, here's a question somebody has. So, but I'm gonna kind of put this in two parts. And so the first part is we're going to talk about just a brief of the grants process. So there's lots of reasons why you want to pursue grant funding. And this is from the investigator's perspective. You know, we in public health in particular, nursing as well, all of us are in this business because we want to make a difference. So that's how we can do it. We can get large pots of money. Nowhere else can we get $500,000 to do an intervention or other such research. And we also want to be able to fund our research. You know, we got into the field because we kind of, as I tell my kids, I wanted to be my own boss. So I like being able to look at the field and see where do I feel like is the best need and being able to move that forward. So there's also this idea with grants that there's this academic bean counting, and that the more grants you have, the greater success you have, and ultimately the more power you have over your own path. So I would be remiss, sometimes that's maybe a touchy subject to talk about, but at the same time, I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't say, you know, those who have more grant funding just automatically because of the dollars that they bring in have a little bit more power at times. It's also the way that you begin to build your research team, and that begins to expand your impact. You've now, instead of just yourself, you know, doing your work, you can now put 5 people, 10 people doing the work. So that's wonderful in thinking about making that difference. And if you're also very savvy, you can get a portion of the indirect costs, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But, you know, that's a nice little chunk of change sometimes that you can use to do even more work. So there's also, the university wants you to pursue grants. And why do they want you to pursue grants? So they love these indirect costs, the IDCs. This is all about showing them the money, because what they, you know, IDCs basically are those costs that are leveraged on top of the budget for the project. So if your budget is $100,000 and your indirect cost rate is 50%, you get a $50,000 just off the top there. And that's always nice. And institutions love that. There's also the prestige of grants. You know, there's There's all kinds of press releases that are coming out where people are, so-and-so has received $5.8 million to study stroke or da-da-da. So there is that aspect that the university loves to utilize. There's also a great way to attract students. You've got open positions, so you can advertise those on a national scale. We're currently accepting students, accepting postdocs. So it's a great recruiting tool. And probably, in my opinion, one of the most important things that probably should come first, would be that you serve the community and the state. I'm a big proponent and always have been that public universities need to serve the residents in which it resides. And so that's a big driving force for me. And it's a big driving force from the university perspective as well. So what are IDCs? I kind of alluded to it before. IDCs are indirect costs, and this is a rate that is decided upon at a federal level. Like I haven't really seen the process, but something goes into it where there may be site visits where people come and look what all's going on at the university or at this institution, and what kinds of costs do they have that need to be like running costs. You think about electricity, you think about telephone lines, all those types of costs that take to run a university or take to run an institution. And so they federally set the indirect cost rate. For our university, it's about almost 50%. I think it's 49.5. So, and like I alluded to, when you've got $100,000, then they add an additional $50,000 for you to that goes directly to the institution. So that's, that can, you think about 100,000 is what usually an RO3, a really small grant has. But we've also got RO1s that have up to 500,000. So that's huge, right? Okay, so how do you begin this? And I want to say this is a process, right? I look back to when I was junior and when I was first starting this out, and I just cringe at some of the things that I did. Like I had no clue. I had wonderful mentors, I have to say, who helped shepherd me along the way. But some of those initial ideas, I'm like, oh yeah, not your best work, Swann. So, I encourage you to be kind to yourself as well and recognize that this is a learning curve, and you're going to get better over time and learn how to do things more savvily or have more finesse, so on and so forth. But to begin with, you want to determine a funding source. And the nice thing here at the university is, at USC at least, is that we have a subscription to an online database that you can, search for and query for. You can also set it up to send you weekly emails that tells me what are the new funding announcements according to your search criteria that you input. And most big universities are going to have that. So that is an invaluable resource to be able to see, what is the best fit for my work. And you want to think broadly, because we in public health know the most probably about the NIH and the various and sundry institutions, but there also are, depending upon what you're studying, there could also be other agencies that are even better fit. There's the USDA, who does a lot with agriculture, nutrition stuff. The Environmental Protection Agency. So if your work focuses in environmental areas, there's that. There's the CDC. CDC does a lot of implementation and dissemination of evidence-based practices. So, that may be where you fit. Foundations are another great way to get smaller pots of money. And I have to say, my colleagues in nursing have taught me a thing or two about applying for foundations, because there are feels like 10 million nursing foundations that folks can apply to, that they just, get a little bit of money and you've got something to do a small pilot study and you can be off. There are also community groups that are offering grants. Here in South Carolina, I know the most, I'm a cancer person, so I know the most about cancer. We have the South Carolina Cancer Alliance, and it has a community grants program that could be ways in which you can get a small little pot of money to do some work. So when you look at the NIH system, they kind of classify things into different categories, of course, and they put a letter with it, just like the federal government, and it can feel like alphabet soup, right? And so I'm just going to kind of briefly go this. I don't, you'll learn as you go on. But probably the most common, or what we're most familiar with, are the R grants. So we have an R03, we have an R21, and we have an R01. And each of these have larger pots of money that you are writing for. So in R03, you're writing for a pot of money of about $100,000 for 1 to 2 years. For an R21, you are writing for a pot of money that's $275,000 over 2, sometimes 3 years. And then an R01 you're writing for a pot of money of $500,000 each year for a total of 5 years. So the R01 is it's considered the creme de la creme here in academia. That's what we're all striving for, is to have that funded R01. Well, then there's a whole slew of other things that may interest folks. So there are the T grants, a T32 and T34, and just like the T implies, T stands for training, right? So these are institutions that write for training grants. So sometimes our students get mixed up. I think that students are applying for those, but no, the institutions are applying for those. An example of that here at the university is the BBIT program that is run with psychology, I think exercise science and epidemiology. That's a T32. And then the PI of that one is Dr. Prince, and it's funded around, they support so many students each year who go through their program. Then you also have the Ks. The Ks, are career development awards. I have no idea, somebody either couldn't spell, or K stands for something else, I don't know. But these are new investigator training mechanisms. So you see a lot of junior faculty applying for Ks. Some of them, like the K07, are focused around diversity in the workforce. So they're wanting minority applicants. Others, I think maybe it's the K08 that wants clinical applicants. They want people, nurse research scientists, physician scientists. Then we also have the Fs, which stand for fellowships. And that's what our students our US citizens can apply for. Unfortunately, our international students cannot apply for those. You also can apply for that as a postdoc too. They have a mechanism for postdocs. Then the Ps are kind of this upper level. This is like the big kahuna of grants. So the Ps stand for program project grants, where you've got like 3 to 5 R01 projects within that. And then you've got all of these resources and infrastructure, what we call cores, supporting all of that work. So these are pretty huge. An example of that here at USC is Dr. Friedrichsen has a PO1 for his stroke center program and all that kind of stuff. So then the other type are called U's, which once again, I don't understand why they got the U, but it's for cooperative agreements. And these can be larger. So probably not as large as a P grant, but there's still a nice little pot of money where you can have different cores or divisions within the grant that focus. But the U means that with a cooperative agreement, there's an expectation that the funding agency, the NIH, is going to have more hands-on with you on that. So they want to work directly with you to implement the grant, so to speak. So, you put it all together. So what happens once you submit this grant? Well, you have a review process, and it's actually a 2-level review. You have scientific review, and then you have programmatic council review. And just this year, they have greatly changed this system and done away with all the old study sections and have created new ones. So it's kind of a whole new world for all of us. But there are what we call standing study sections that are groups of people who serve for I can't remember if it's a 2-year term, and they come to every meeting, and they meet 3 times a year to review sections for all 3 deadlines for the NIH. Then they also have ad hoc study sections. So for those calls that they want to get reviewed more quickly, they'll bring folks together on an ad hoc basis. And one of the most instrumental things for me in helping me to learn and to to make that growing curve steeper for me is to be a member of a review panel. Lots of times with the standing study sections, they have folks that have to be absent during some of those meetings. And so they'll invite people on an ad hoc basis to come on. And those are just so informative. So I encourage you, if you have the opportunity, to definitely explore that. And the NIH is being much more open about it because they understand that it's very instructive for junior faculty. So now there's a process where you can actually apply to be a reviewer. The applications are scored anywhere from 1 being the absolute best all the way to 9 being the absolute worst. Then once you've gone through the scientific review, this is done by scientists who are technically your peers, then it undergoes programmatic council review where the particular center that you've submitted it to. So for me, a lot of times that's the National Cancer Institute. They decide, okay, we've got our priorities, what applications fit that, and what is going to be what we call the funding line. How many applications can we fund? Can we fund at the 10% of the applications? And so we rank them, in order by score, and we take the top 10%, or can we do less than that, more than that? So there can be sometimes some politics involved in that, not typically with the ARD grants. I see that more with center grants, the big ones, the Ps. Because that's a huge pot of money, and there's certain priorities of the NIH, and there may be some groups that are really entrenched in that area where the NIH wants to go, and there may be other groups who aren't. And even though they might have scored slightly higher, this other group, which is where the NIH wants to go, they're going to fund that one. So you will, once you're notified that we're going to fund it, and that's you call the NOAA, you're always excited, notification of award, and you love to get that letter that says, you've now been awarded. Now, before you can get that letter, you have to submit what they call the just-in-time information. So the NIH wants to get an information, do you have IRB approval to use to do the work? And they also want to make sure that everybody, all the personnel on the that are going to be funded by the grant, do not have any overlapping work, so that they're not paying somebody twice to do the same work. So you have to submit all that, and once that you check those boxes off, then you get your notice of award, and you do your happy dance in the hallway. I've done several happy dances. Definitely worth it. It is such a great feeling. So once you've got the money and you're going about your business, doing your research, you'll have to submit annual reports. You'll have to submit final reports to that, because you've got to be a good steward with the money and show what you're doing and what are the results. And then you want to submit manuscripts for whatever organization that you are, that you have funding from. 99% of them want to see those manuscripts. That's showing impact of the dollars that they're investing. And two, those manuscripts help the NIH to say, this is a priority area. We'd like more money to this particular topic, or more money to that other topic. So that's one of the things that they're always looking for. So, right now I'm lucky enough to have a 20-year history. And so I've been I was a young whippersnapper in the heydays of funding lines, when probably it was about 35% of applications submitted to NIH were being funded. This was back in 2004, 3, 5, somewhere around in there. And, it was a great day to be an investigator then. But funding lines have gone down, right? And so now there are some places where only 4%, 5% of the applications they're funding. So, what do you do? So you just got to keep pushing on with your publications and show that you are still doing scholarly work. Because even though publications may be from unfunded work, that's still showing your productivity. The other thing is, and I have to tell y'all, I have really struggled with this at times recently, is the perseverance. You've just got to keep on going after it. And Dr. Birch would probably just chuckle if he heard me say this, but he is like my mentor when it comes to, my idol when it comes to perseverance, because he had a project that it took him 10 years to get funded. And he just kept submitting it, tweaking it, trying different things, trying different funding mechanisms, and he finally got his R01. So I'm like, you know what? Jim Birch can do it, and I can do it too. So, you've just got to persevere, and it can be hard, when you sometimes I felt like it's an exercise in futility, but then I had a colleague of mine stroke me a little bit. She said, Swann, you're a very gifted writer. You can do this. You've just got to keep submitting. And I'm like, you're right. You're absolutely right. So it's also good to have variety in the types and funding sources. So, don't always keep going after the NIH. Is there a foundation that you can go after? Is there the Department of Defense? Try one of those. So, try different things depending upon what your area of research is in. So how can I increase my chance of success? So this can be really hard for students and junior faculty to grasp, but you have really in your grant work have to be a used car salesperson and just sell your work. You need to sell yourself, you need to sell your ideas, and you need to sell your institution. And it can be, I remember when I was a student, you're very uncertain and like, I don't have anything to offer anybody. Or as a junior faculty, like all these grades, like what do I have to offer? But you've got to tap into it. And a lot of times it takes a mentor helping you to tap into what do they see about you that is the selling point? What do they see about your idea that is a selling point? So the other thing that is really critical is, have you everybody heard the KISS principle, which is keep it simple, stupid? So you've got to think about that. You want to keep things, don't make things complicated. Always thinking about, can I translate my idea and make sure that my 15-year-old daughter understands what we're trying to do? You want to have clear, concise writing. And one of the best ways to know if you're being an effective writer is to have someone outside your area review it. And do they get it? Do they understand what you're trying to do? The other thing that I cannot emphasize enough is to follow directions. And when I first saw this, I was all sanctimonious, like back in the day, like, oh, why can't people follow directions? Well, now here I am, a senior investigator, and there have been times where I've submitted stuff that I did not follow the directions. And I, look at it, I'm like, I'm such an idiot. I'm such an idiot. So even higher up, you still have to follow directions. And, it's lots of things going on. You're putting in 2 grants or, there's all kinds of legitimate reasons why you just didn't take a minute to look and see how do they really want this? And the other thing is you have to think about who is reviewing your work. And you don't want to make them mad by making their job harder. So reviewers are just like us. We don't have any time. We have no free time. Everything is scripted for us. So we take on reviewing, and we're probably going to give this application. I've heard some people say they spend as little as 10 minutes with it. Some reviewers say that are really quick readers. I've heard other people say I spend 20 minutes, but they're not going to be able to spend 1 or 2 hours with your work. So you want to make things really crystal clear for them about why, and think about helping them write their reviews. So part of the review they have to address is the significance of the work. So you be really explicit about the significance of this work is, and you're just helping the reviewer because all they have to do is just literally copy paste or just write verbatim what you said. This work is significant because. And then, like I hinted at before with Dr. Birch, resiliency. You just have to, it's hard to take a lick and keep on ticking, but just know that you're in good company. It is not you. It is this funding environment. You are intelligent. You can do this. So, because the other thing that you have to keep in mind that, and you will see this if when you serve on review panels, a lot of times it's the game of luck. It's just that your idea really sparked the reviewer and they were like, this is the best thing since sliced bread. And I'm going to advocate for it. And you have those personalities on review panels that are just like, everybody needs to believe me. And everybody does. And, sometimes the luck goes your way and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes things beyond your control. You opted to do a food frequency questionnaire, and the scientist that is reviewing your work thinks that food frequency questionnaires are trash, and they only believe in the 24-hour recall. And no matter what you say or how good your idea is, they don't care because they believe that this is the way to go. So, you know, you just can't let that get you down. So I also wanted to take some time to go through briefly the grant application. So, you know, this hour, I can just give you just a little taste of all that goes into grant writing and applying for grants. So there are some great resources that I will mention at the end. I'm also happy to send out to, you know, the book that we use that I use for one of my own classes in grant writing, I think is a tremendous resource. So I'll send the title and information for that one. So you have the major parts of the research plan, and those are the introduction only applies if you are resubmitting your grant. If it's a first submission, you don't write an introduction, but you have the specific aims, which all you get is 1 page, and then you write the research strategy, which for an R01 can be 12 pages in length, up to 12 pages. And for an R03 and R21 has a max of 6 pages. And within that, they want you to address the significance, the innovation, and the approach of your work. Now, I tell my students that the specific aims page is probably the most important page out of everything. You want to spend your most time here making sure it is exquisitely as perfect as you can make it. Make sure that it's exquisitely readable, that you don't use a lot of jargon, and that you are selling it hard. You're selling yourself some, you're selling your ideas, that they are just brilliant, and that this is the most significant, impactful work ever, because that is where your reviewer is going to place their attention. And if you don't grab them then, you're going to have a really hard time grabbing them in the other section, the research strategy section. The thing though that you have to take into account, like it'd be nice if we just had to focus on the specific aims and the research strategy section, but there's a whole pile of other things that have to go into the grant. And, you know, rookie mistake, and I made this, I remember doing this. I was up at 3 in the morning doing all the little squishy detailed parts that I'm like, I just want to focus on science. You know, but no, I had to do this other piece. So there are things that we have to put into grants like the budget and the budget justification. We have to describe the facilities and the equipment that we're using. We have to have bio sketches where we talk about how, and all of these have to be about selling. You're selling the idea, you're selling the institution, you're selling your investigators, that these are the most brilliant group of people ever. So it does take time, and fortunately at the university, we do have a great system for assisting putting this rest together. But I'm recently working with the Medical University of South Carolina, and let me just tell you, that is a machine. They got people upon people. I was just like, oh, it's really nice. So they can help with that. So in the specific aims, you want to talk about what is the goal of the research in simple terms, you know, state it simply. You want to summarize expected outcomes. You want to talk about why this is important. Probably the most important thing that you can do throughout any of this is you have to make it crystal clear to your reviewers of the why factor. Why should this work? Why is this work important? And you want to list the specific objectives. You usually have the specific aims down at the very bottom. And then within the research strategy, you have to address the significance. And this is a direct quote from the NIH definition of significance. Is, does the project address an important problem or critical barrier to progress in the field? If the aims of the project are achieved, how will scientific knowledge, technical capability, and/or clinical practice be improved? How will successful completion of the aims change the concepts, methods, technologies, treatment services, or preventive interventions that drive this field? And I have to say that this is where I've probably grown the most in terms of my grant writing, because way back when I was a young whippersnapper, I was like, I just want to understand what's the relationship between breast cancer and diet. You know, that's important. That's because I could visualize the long stream effects, but I wasn't really good at verbalizing that and writing that down. And it's as I've gotten, become a better writer and progressed, I've become to realize I've really got to walk the reviewer that we're changing diet, that diet is going to change cancer incidence is going to change cancer mortality, and I'm going to save the world with this work. So, have to keep emphasizing that. Then the part that I probably struggle with the most, and actually I think most people struggle with this. I have one colleague, Dr. James Hebert, who is so gifted about writing this particular section. He can just, it's amazing. He convinces me that this is the most innovative thing that has ever happened. But it's that innovation where you want to talk about, does the application challenge and seek to shift current research or clinical practice paradigms by utilizing novel theoretical concepts, approaches, or methodologies, instrumentation, or interventions? And are the concepts, approaches, or methodologies, instrumentation, or interventions novel to one field of research or novel in a broad sense? Because that's another way you can apply. If you do something in geography all the time, but then we take geography and overlay it within cancer, and people are like, oh my gosh, we can do so much, but that's so novel, that's so innovative. Or is a refinement, improvement, or new application of theoretical concepts, approaches, or methodologies, instrumentation, or interventions proposed? So with all of that, are you taking something that has been tried in European American populations, and we're going to adapt it into African American populations that are underserved and who have these horrible disparities and inequalities that we need to intervene upon? So there's all ways that you can kind of conceptualize this innovation. And then in the approach part, this is where I often think of is the meat of the project, because this is where you've got to tell them what you're going to do with the money. So you want to talk about strategies, methodologies, analyses. You also want to deal with if they're, you don't want the reviewer identifying problems that you don't have an answer for. So you also want to talk about, okay, I anticipate there could be some problems with this, but this is what I'm going to do about it. That's critical for teaching the reviewer that you are innovative and that you can handle problems and reasonable solutions, scientific solutions to those problems. You also want to talk about what are the benchmarks for success. And you also want to talk about if there are, once again, this kind of problem solving, are there particularly risky aspects and how are you going to handle that? It is important to incorporate preliminary studies, kind of sprinkle it throughout. There may be in the research approach section that you want to have a section, say, talking about preliminary studies, but I always think it's a good idea to talk about, because you begin to establish yourself as an expert. We have done this preliminary work or this previous work to show. And so one of the things that I struggled with the most as a student and junior faculty member were these preliminary studies sections. Because a lot of times I thought, I have to have had funded work to say it's preliminary studies. And that is not the case at all. Not the case. Any previous publications, even when they were unfunded, these are still work that shows that you have led a research team and you have implemented something and done something and found results. So there are skills that you've developed as a part of this. There's also stuff, and this is where it kind of blew my mind when I had a colleague of mine say, I did some, I saw it in an application that they said they had conducted key informant interviews with key stakeholders for this particular project and and they couched. I always thought that all of that type of stuff was just kind of legwork that you had to do. I mean, I have to go talk to people and say how best to do this. And I have to say, do you see any barriers? If so, what can we do? Can we work together to solve this? La, 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 la. And I just thought that's just legwork. We all have to do that. But then I saw it being displayed in writing and people talking about, this is preliminary work that you're doing. And it's like a light bulb went off, like, oh my gosh, yes, I see it now. So don't get into the habit of thinking this is just what you have to do. You want to talk about all the things that you are doing to ensure your success. This is just, I find my students find this helpful at times just to kind of have, because one of the things I did in my young whippersnapper days, probably even more so, I do it now too, is you're with a topic so much that you just, all the intermediary steps don't really register in your mind. You just know they happen, right? And you do them. But you've got, reviewers don't have that luxury. So you need to walk them incrementally through what you're going to do. So I always like to start kind of with an outline to make sure I touch on everything. So this is kind of my comment outline that I touch on. And sometimes it doesn't apply. You know, if you're doing secondary data analysis, recruitment and retention is really not applicable. However, you could substitute that instead of recruitment and retention. You could talk about data linkage and data acquisition, and you really want to walk them through what's a step-by-step kind of process. The project team is another one that you don't want to leave out in the dark, because you need to convince your reviewers that this is the best team possible and everybody's brilliant on your team. So you want to talk about, you know, and right now the big push is that you know, interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary. So I love collaborating with my peeps, you know, lots of different people, lots of ideas. We come together and you can just do amazing stuff. So it's great to talk about that and say, I've got a social worker, I've got a pharmacist, I've got a nurse, I've got an epidemiologist, I've got a health behaviorist, I've got all these people and they are brilliant. So you want to talk about that on your project team. So one other thing that's key about as a junior faculty member that you want to utilize is the new investigator funding, or not funding, new investigator mechanism. So the NIH defines who a new investigator is, that they have not competed successfully for an NIH supported research project. They've got some exceptions to those, like the small grants, they're not going to count. It's the R01s really that they're mainly looking at. And what they do is they, first of all, review these applications first on the study section when everybody's fresh. And yes, these review panels will last usually for a day and a half to 2 days. So you can imagine at the end of the second day, people are just like, I don't care anymore, just get it done. So yours are reviewed first. And the reviewers understand that this is a junior investigator that we need to invest in. And so there's just a slight relaxing of expectations because of that. And, you know, especially if you can demonstrate a great mentorship team that say, you know, they're going to get it. You know, they've got a great mentor who knows how this is done. And then, so here are some things, what I call common errors and basically what I did as a junior investigator that I wish I had known better. So, the big thing that I remember doing, and I still see it a lot on review sections, is doing too much in too little time. So our field draws idealists. I'm an idealist. You know, I think, yes, I can cure cancer. We can all cure cancer together. And I'm going to, but, you know, when reviewers kind of break it down and look at, so you're going to recruit 10,000 people in 6 months? No, that is not going to work for you. So you got to be cognizant of that. You got to think about, you know, another thing that I see often with my students is, you know, in cancer, we always want to, one of the things we want to intervene upon is cancer survivorship, right? But you can't usually do that as part of a grant because cancer survivors can live 5, 10 years. We hope they're living 5 or 10 years, right? Longer, even longer. So unless you have a really virulent cancer, we can't follow survivorship. But how often will people put in an aim that says we're going to follow survivorship? I'm like, you can't realistically do that in the 2-year grant period that you have. You're not going to have any deaths. The other thing that I see people making mistakes about is making the aims dependent upon each other. You never want to put yourself in a situation where one aim, you're answering a question, is physical activity related to cancer? Yes, no, kind of thing. Or you're gonna, and you find there's no relationship. And then you said in the next one to design an intervention for physical activity. Well, you can say, well, if there's no relationship, then you've just kind of tanked your project because there's no point in pursuing it further because you've shown that it's not related and it's not going to impact anything, right? So that's very simplistic. But while the aims are related to each other, certainly you want to word them and want to work them in such a way that regardless of the answer you get, you can still proceed to the other ones. The other thing, like I said, I think this is the most critical, and I revamped my grant writing class this year to really emphasize this in every single class, is not selling your idea. You know, like I said, understanding the review process helps tremendously. And one of the things that it blew my mind the first time I experienced it, it blows my students' minds whenever I talk to them about it. But so what happens with these grant panels? So you typically, like the NIH gets like 80 grants that are going to be reviewed by a single panel, right? The panel is usually made up of around 15, 20, 25 people. And so they will divvy all these grants out, and usually you get between 4 to 8 applications per investigator. And you are assigned to either be the first reviewer, the second reviewer, or the third reviewer. And so they're divvied up into all of the people on the panel, and you never see. So I see my 8 applications, but I don't even see my those other. If I have 8, the other 72, I'll never see them initially. So I focus on my 8. And of course, when you're the first reviewer, you got to be really on. So you want to make sure it is very comprehensive, that you know all your P's and Q's, and you know you got it. So you'll focus on those. And then you get to the second, where you're second reviewer, and you're like, well, the first reviewer is going to handle most of this. I just have to come up with things that are, other things. So I do that. And the third reviewer is kind of, there have been 2 people ahead of you who've hopefully gotten most of it. So I'm just, so that's kind of how you prioritize, or how at least I do it as a reviewer. And then we all come together in either, well, now it's been virtually, a day and a half to 2 days. And you basically go through the applications, or let me back up. First, you input all your scores. The 3 reviewers put their scores in. And then from that, you come up with a ranking of all 80 applications. And so you can't cover all 80 during 2 days. So they basically make a cut point at about 50% of the applications, and say the lower 50% we're not going to discuss. They've got the feedback from and the scoring from the reviewers, those 3 reviewers, that's what they get back, and you'll get a little thing called not discussed on your summary statement. There is no shame in not discussed, right? I've had not discussed many times. And all the greats, Dr. Steve Blair, I know has had a not discussed at times in his life. So we've all had not discussed, no shame. It happens to all of us. You just got to submit it again, perseverance. So then the top 50% of the applications, they will discuss. And so usually you cannot see the other applications till like 24 hours before you meet, right? Because only after all the applications are scored will they release all of the applications to be viewed. So of course, I'm not going to look at, another 72 applications in 24 hours. There's no way. I'm not even going to look at some of them. Maybe if it has a title that I think is kind of interesting, I might take a look at the specific games page, but no, you just don't, there's not enough time. So then you come in, and we go through the applications, and the 3 reviewers, the first reviewer gives a big introduction to the application and does the most comprehensive review, and then the other 2 chime in, usually talking about things that they differed on or other things that they saw. And so then after that, that whole entire panel can ask questions, discuss, like, I think that what you said makes a lot of sense, or I disagree with what you said, this other reviewer said, And then they ask the first 3 reviewers again to state their final score, anywhere from 1 to 9. And then they ask, and so they state their scores, and then the rest of the panel has to vote within that range of scores. So you have 3 people who reviewed an application on a panel of 25. The other 22 people have never reviewed this application at all. They're going just based upon the 3 reviewers. That's what blew my mind. I'm like, can score it without having read it? What? Yes, that's what happens. So that's where you can see it's a game of luck. Like, did your writing really influence that first reviewer? Like, they thought it was amazing and they became your advocate, or did you really make them mad for whatever reason? They said, this is crap. So they can have so much influence. So That's why, getting back to, you've got to constantly think that you've got to convince somebody that this is the best idea. And it goes against what we as scientists are used to, because when we write for scientific publications, you know, it's about, you want to sound smart. You want to sound like you know what you're doing. And, you know, other people that are experts in this field are going to be evaluating your work, and you want to make sure they know what you're doing. So, you know, it's very prescriptive when we write manuscripts. You know, we've got, these are the results, these are the implications, that's, you know, and, you know, I can remember when I was young writing manuscripts and saying, you know, making broad statements, these results show us that this is a promising avenue. And I can remember my mentor saying, that's a strong statement, Swann. You want to back that down 1,000 and say, this points in potential new directions. Well, then the opposite is true when we're talking about grant writing. You know, we want, now there's a medium. Don't go running off the rails and like saying you're going to cure cancer, because that's not what we're trying to do. But you don't want to get into scientific jargon. You don't want to get into lingo. You want to, in a very concise way, sell this idea. The other thing that I see people is not fully developing the story, and you want to approach it that this work is built upon a story. There's a reason why you went into it. What were those reasons, in the sense of how that there was a problem, and how you figured out there was a problem, and why you think this is so important, and what, you know, so you're wanting to build the story and create the story. So there's an aspect that you want to teach the reviewer. And I mentioned this before, but you want to make sure your idea passes the so what test. Okay, so, and I know, you know, we get married to our ideas, like we are just, this is everything. But if the majority of people are saying, I don't know why you're focusing in on a disease that affects 2 people when we've got Alzheimer's that affects, you know, 50% of the people in, you know, in such and such age group. So you're always going to have that aspect that you're wanting to constantly emphasize when you're writing it. This does make a difference. This is important. So here are some resources I will share my slides, and people are welcome to, you know, just how to look at other things. There's some, the NIH really over the last 10 years has just expanded its training information. So there's tons of webinars now where you can go and look at stuff. They're now even releasing grant applications that you can kind of see, you know, this was a successful grant application, and what does that look like? That's also, I probably should have put that on a helpful tip too. If you have a mentor that will share their grants with you, I've learned so much, like how to write persuasively. All of that I learned from mentors and seeing how other people do things. So that is key. And I know as a student, I was like, they're not gonna want to share anything with me. I'm just a lowly student. But for the most part, these are giving people. And I think 90% of the time you're gonna get a yes. And if you get a no, that's okay. Just find another person. So, and here's my information. I'm happy to answer additional questions, or, you know, you want some additional resources. This is me. So I think that is all. Yes. For that. Do we have any questions?
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Adams. You took the literal words out of my mouth. Any questions for Dr. Adams? Swann, you did a little bit of this during your presentation, kind of, you know, this is what I find pretty difficult, or this is what typically people find difficult. How about, and I love the kind of the narrative approach to all this, right? And so somebody has called me not senior, not junior anymore. So it's tough to always feel like you want to keep learning. But if you did have, let's see, what a question. Can you tell us about maybe something that you really, it took multiple tries to get that funded? So you talked about some colleagues who've had their experiences with 10 years. And I remember going to a talk or being part of the boot camp and hearing Beats talk about, you know, how many times he submitted something. And you never hear those stories, right? You always kind of hear the successful story, like the end point. So can you share maybe a little bit about how many times, how many revisions it's taken you to finally get something funded, and you genuinely feel like, I got it?
So,
It's not everyone you feel that way.
and then there's times you feel like, oh, this is it, and you get it back. Crap, this
Right.
is barely. So there, I had an R15 that was funded back in 2014, and it took me 3 submissions. And on the 3rd submission, I had a lot of interaction with the program officer. So that was, I think in retrospect, if I had had more conversation early on in the earlier submissions with the program officer, I might have had a better chance of getting funded than it did when you're coming around the 3rd time. But that said, so that's one example. I submitted 3 times. I had another R01 that I was submitting for a physical activity intervention among cancer survivors. And I submitted that puppy 3 times and it's still not funded. So I've, morphed it into some other stuff. And so I've had another 2 submissions with it, still not funded. So I'm still gonna keep beating away at that. I've heard people taking 7, 8, 10 submissions. You gotta keep at it. And I know it's hard, and it's hard to accept the criticism, and you feel like you get it just perfect for what they're asking. And then it's like a new reviewer comes on board and says, well, what about this? And like the previous 3 times, this was never mentioned. So it's frustrating. It's frustrating, but you as a mentor told me, Swann, you can't win an award if you don't submit anything. And she's right. You just have to keep turning it around. Even if, there may be times where you think this is total trash. And I found in a lot of times that the times that I think it's the worst is when people perceive it as the best. So maybe I'm not that good of a judge of my own work.
That's a good point. But yeah, the project officer piece, I think I'm learning how important and really how impactful that can have. And just really, you start with the spark of an idea, they can help you work through it, and even stand in communication with them after it's been submitted, I think also is great advice. Other questions? We've got quite
Lucy, can I ask a question? It's Caroline.
Yeah. Hey, Caroline.
Hey, nice to see you. Hi, Swann. Thank you for the talk. I'm Caroline Rudisil. I'm an HPEB with Lucy, faculty member, and I'm chipping away at the NIH. And my question for you is if you could give us any thoughts on, like, at what point do you just look at something and say, like, this is just not NIH fundable, like, let's just put this one somewhere else, or just not do this?
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that?
I think you want to gauge, probably a good gauge of that could be, are you convincing people that this is significant? If you're getting the most criticism around the significance of the project, I think that's where you may want to think, okay, they're not getting the overall idea here, and maybe this needs some purposing, or maybe I need to change the needle some on this one. I'm one of those that never give up an idea. There's always a way to morph it. Maybe I need to talk to some more people and get some more ideas about ways to completely turn it in a different direction. But that's where I find, and as a reviewer, if I'm just not thrilled about a topic, I'll say, I just don't, I'll really pound at the significance. I don't understand the significance. How is this going to be impactful? This doesn't make sense to me. And then of course you find a whole slew of things wrong with the methodology. But if the people are convinced that this is a great area, if you're getting good feedback there, positive feedback, and then it's the research approach where you get more criticism, like you can continue to pound away at that and tweak it to get it like they want to see it. Hope that's helpful.
No, it's really helpful. I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Thanks for your question, Caroline. Other questions? It's also great to hear the human perspective behind the reviewer's thoughts, because it can feel like a black hole if you haven't done it before. And also the first time you do it, it's kind of like, the birds start chirping. You're like, oh my gosh, this is what they do. This is so interesting. So,
What I find so funny, on review panels, and I did this too, like new people, like young and junior investigators who are on the, because they have taken it and they're like, I'm going to take this apart. And there's just all these things wrong. And like the senior back, like, yeah, I like this. Yeah, I think this has got some potential here, and, it's so obvious that junior people put all this time and effort into it. And then, the juniors or the more seniors are just like, oh, this is great. This is great. Yeah. So it's funny to see that happen.
Okay. Yay, Kaylee. So one of our CADMR scientists commented that she's submitting her first RO1 for the June 5th deadline, and this presentation was very helpful and inspiring. Good luck, Kaylee. That's great.
You can do this.
All right. Any other comments or questions for Dr. Adams? All right, seeing none, a few housekeeping items. So join me again in thanking Dr. Adams. And also thank you for joining us today. And we do have a couple of announcements for the good of our group. So first, in order for us to continue offering health disparities in minority aging content that is of interest to you, we ask that you complete a brief evaluation to let us know how we're doing and to give us your ideas for future seminars. And so, see, do we have our QR code available? We do. QR code here on this slide to access the survey. And also we will mail you a link to complete the survey at your convenience. And then secondly, if you would like more information about upcoming seminars or other activities sponsored by the Carolina Center on Alzheimer's Disease and Minority Research, please do visit our website, and it's at www.sc.edu/CADMR, and that's CCADMR, or you may email me, and I am Lucy Ingram at LANNANG@sc.edu. And we hope to see you all again soon. Thanks, Swann. It's great.